Hello and welcome to Let's Talk, a Tulsa World virtual town hall. I'm Wayne Green, editorial pages editor of the Tulsa World. Today's town hall is graciously underwritten by the George Kaiser Family Foundation. Today we're going to be talking about the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on state colleges and universities with Glen Johnson, Oklahoma Chancellor for Higher Education, and Leigh Goodson, President of Tulsa Community College. Welcome to both of you. We asked our questions they'd like to see us ask today, and I wanted to get to as many of those questions as we can. Chancellor Johnson, why don't you start by describing for us the challenge presented by trying to protect the state's college students from the spread of the COVID-19 virus?
Okay, good morning, and thank you, Wayne, for this opportunity. I think in terms of the challenges that we're presented with in protecting students, there's certainly many, but I want to say at the outset, protecting not only our students, but our faculty, staff, and visitors really is our top priority in the state system in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic. To mitigate the spread of COVID-19, one of the first decisions we made, and when I say we, the entire system of higher education made, was to transition our students online literally during spring break in mid-March, and we successfully transitioned over 173,000 students to online, virtual, and alternative delivery formats during that time. Again, in an effort to protect our students and our campus, we have canceled, I think, as you know, many commencement exercises, conferences, and other campus events. Commencements will be held either late summer, in some cases early fall, in a virtual format, or they may be rescheduled in other formats at a later date. In terms of our residential housing, for those campuses that have residential housing, we've essentially asked those students to move out, with the exception, of course, of students who have nowhere else to live. Our cafeterias, by and large, have been converted to what we call grab and go environments, where students can pick up meals, but there's no on-site preparation or service. And again, in an effort to mitigate further, including TCC, but every campus has now gone to an online delivery format for classes during this summer. So, Wayne, I think we've really tried to look at this from as many angles as we can, and the overriding effort and decision have been to protect our students and to certainly mitigate and stop and slow down the spread of COVID-19. Our response has been aggressive, and we've basically had to turn on a dime to do it. But I think our campuses have responded very responsibly and very well on behalf of our students, our faculty, and staff and visitors.
That sounds like a huge undertaking. How many students are we talking about transitioning from an in-class environment to an online environment?
We have transitioned and did this literally during the week to 10 days of spring break, 173,000 students. From the, in late February, early March, they were experiencing the traditional face-to-face delivery, and that transition to online essentially occurred from 10 days to 2 weeks. And again, our feedback by and large has been that the transition was successful. So it's I think a large undertaking, but one that has been not only well executed, but one that's allowed us to continue the learning environment for our students this spring, certainly in a different teaching format, but the learning opportunity continues.
President Goodson, describe how Tulsa Community College has been dealing with this situation.
Yes, thank you, Wayne, and thank you for bringing us together for this discussion. It's a great opportunity to explain to everybody what higher ed has been through in this process. Well, like the Chancellor said, right before spring break, we all decided that we could tell that it was inevitable that we were going to have to make some changes in the spring semester. several of our colleagues, and we did this as well, we went ahead and extended spring break a week longer than it would have already been, to give faculty an opportunity to retrofit, if you will, their courses to an online environment, so that we could deliver the highest quality educational experience possible, given the situation that we're in. So we did that first. We transitioned over 1,800 sections from face-to-face to an online format for the spring. In the summer, we're in the process of transitioning 530 sections, and in the fall, we'll be transitioning 2,300 sections from face-to-face to a different environment. We've also contacted over 15,000 students by personal phone call in the You Matter calling campaign, to just check on students, see if there was anything that they needed, make sure they were doing okay. If they were having some challenges in a course, we wanted to make sure and get them connected to our tutors remotely. So all those really granular functions that we're still involved in as a college, those are still taking place, and students need assistance getting themselves connected to those various resources. That includes tutors, the library, even our Student Government Association is still meeting. And so we're making accommodations for everything that we were doing before to the extent possible. We also started an Inspire Hope emergency fund, and we've awarded about $93,000 in emergency funds to 175 students. So we have had a lot going on. I think the one thing that I'm most concerned about, but continue to be proud of us on, is the concerns with access and the digital divide. There's a huge equity gap in terms of who has access to at-home Wi-Fi, who may or may not have a device. And while we haven't solved all those problems, we are aggressively working on that challenge so that we can accommodate students for the summer, and even more so for the fall. So we have popped up Wi-Fi hotspots in our parking lots across all 4 anchor campuses across the community. So a student can drive up, log into their TCC ID, and participate in that Wi-Fi hotspot and turn in their assignments or whatever if they don't have Wi-Fi at home. So that was a creative solution, but we know that that is something that we're concerned about going forward.
Chancellor Johnson, this all sounds terribly expensive. What sort of costs have been involved in it, and what sort of financial resources do you have to deal with the situation?
Well, as Wayne, as I mentioned earlier, there have been costs associated with transitioning 173,000 students to an online virtual format here in mid-March. One, just the costs of that transition in terms of the acquisition, the purchase of additional webcams, cameras, licenses, and other direct costs associated with that conversion. Simultaneously, we, with the situation in our residence halls and the fact that students have been asked to move out for safety purposes, there has been a significant loss of revenue, not only in the rebates that have had to be provided to students for the move out, but also with the loss of dollars from our campus meal plans. So you have all of those combined. I do want to say, in terms of efforts to mitigate it, we've been very appreciative. We had a Zoom call, the presidents and the regents, last Thursday with U.S. Senator James Lankford, who gave us some additional insight on the federal stimulus legislation. But I think we need to say we've been very appreciative of the prompt action from Congress in that area. But again, as appreciative as we are, just the reality, let me just use one example. At the University of Oklahoma, they of the 106 million that came to Oklahoma higher education. I think, as you know, that was broken down correctly. 50% of that 106 million goes to the students. The other 50% to the campus and to the institution. So in OU's case, their share of that 106 million was about 16 million, with 8 of that going to the student. The remaining 8 million, which the institution had from the stimulus, on day one, they were looking at the expenses that would be incurred through the rebates for housing, the rebates for meals, what it was going to cost and has cost to transition to online education. Their costs on day one were 12 million. So essentially, at the very beginning, the costs that have incurred have exceeded the money that's come from the stimulus plan. Still, we want to say that money is greatly appreciated, but I think in terms of balancing, it still created a situation where the costs have exceeded the dollars coming in there. Of course, again, yesterday our legislature announced their budget agreement, and again, I think we want to say thanks there. The reduction to higher education in the budget could have exceeded the 3.95% reduction that we received. It could have been much higher than that, but again, nevertheless, there it looks like we will be on top of all of this, also in a position to make decisions on how to cut essentially 4% out of our budgets at our colleges and universities. I might also say that as we look in terms of costs, Wayne, another concern, and certainly President Goodson, I've talked with her on this issue as well, as we go into fall enrollment, there is a concern that enrollment may be down somewhat on our campuses. Certainly we're not going to know that until we get further along in the process, but tuition and fees are a very, very important part of our financial equation. And if there's a decline in enrollment, that's going to create another financial difficulty for higher education as we are trying to address our financial needs in this COVID-19 pandemic.
So the 50% that you say is going to students, what's the form of that? And does that money flow back to the university somewhere?
Well, it really, it goes, the criteria, Wayne, is that it needs to be used by the student to address expenses that they've incurred as a result of COVID-19 in order to be able to stay in class and to continue their college education. So it can be everything from materials they need to purchase for their classes, tablets, connectivity online. It can extend to dollars that they've been out for either housing or related costs along those lines. It even has a provision that extends that if they, as a result of all this, they have needs like childcare, that it goes to address those. But it's basically the broad criteria is to expenses that students have incurred as a result of this, to provide them an opportunity, these funds, in order to be able to use these funds to continue their college education.
But it doesn't directly flow back to the schools in the form of tuition or something like that. Yeah.
No,
so at the same time, we're trying to preserve the teaching mission of the colleges and universities. They also have a research mission that has an obvious role during the pandemic. And also there's resources at college campuses that are obviously useful in a challenging period. Can you describe for us how the colleges and universities have been part of the state's response to the coronavirus?
I can, Wayne, and again, hats off. I think no surprise, Tulsa Community College and President Goodson have really been at the forefront of this effort. So I want to say that and commend her leadership on this issue immediately. And we have come together as a system. I try to facilitate calls with all the presidents at least once a week. Sometimes it's been twice a week, for us to come together, make decisions, share best practices, and then determine how we need to proceed on this multitude of issues that we've been confronted with. To that end, early on, every institution gathered and put together all of their personal protective equipment and donated that equipment immediately or within a day or two of the onset of the pandemic to local hospitals, local health clinics, or regional hospitals in the area. I might mention Southwestern as an example. They have used some of their 3D equipment to prevent manufacture the face shields that are used in a preventative way for those that are on the front line in the healthcare area of combating COVID-19. The OU and OSU Health Sciences Center both have been front and center. The University of Oklahoma, from a research standpoint, has been involved not only in research at the university, but also on a national scale, both to, as they continue to work towards the development of a vaccine for COVID-19, but also in antibody testing and antibody research. University of Oklahoma has been extremely involved in that effort. Oklahoma State University early on provided not only a testing site, but a testing lab where the testing could be conducted, both involving the Stillwater campus at Oklahoma State University, as well as OSU Tulsa. And I should mention, because I think she's been very prominent and provided great leadership, the president of OSU Health Sciences Center, Dr. Casey Schrum, certainly an important member of our higher education community. As everyone knows, she's been front and center. She's on the governor's Solutions Task Force. She's the governor's cabinet secretary for science and innovation, and she has been literally, in many cases, the medical voice in the governor's daily press conferences as he updates the state on our response to COVID-19. All of our campuses have come together, I think, in a significant way. Our two research institutions, as you mentioned, though, have really provided great leadership in this space and have been, I think, very aggressive in their efforts to respond and to provide to leverage all of the assets that we have as a system, and certainly our two research institutions have, in order to address COVID-19.
President Goodson, we've all become aware of the social need for health professionals, nurses, and other health professionals. Mm-hmm. Graduation day is coming up. Are you about to turn out a new class of nurses ready to jump into the
We are. We have 40 students that are in the career mobility track right now, meaning that they're currently in a health profession already, either as an LPN or a paramedic. And so they're working and going to school at the same time. They'll be graduating this spring, and then we'll have 180 more nursing students that graduate in December. Our normal cycle usually graduated nursing students in December. We're now admitting students every semester. So once we get through that December graduation, we will have approximately that many graduates every semester, not just in the fall semester. So we're excited about that increase in our class sizes, so to speak. And then across all of our allied health programs, such as cardiovascular technician, rad tech, and some of the other programs, we have across those 13 programs about the same number, about 180 graduates that are going to graduate this fall. Mm-hmm. So we feel like we're important to that process.
Sure. Chancellor Johnson, could you put that in a statewide perspective?
Well, I can, Wayne, and I think this is really significant if you look at as we have graduation approaching, although it's going to be in a different format than it's ever been before. But if you look at what we will be producing in the healthcare area with our graduations this spring across our 25 colleges and universities in our state system, We'll have over 4,800 credentialed healthcare workers graduating and going directly into the workforce to continue the effort to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. 1,700 registered nurses, 700 doctors, 753 public health professionals and specialists, and 1,500 allied health workers. President Goodson alluded to rad tech and other areas, respiratory therapists, the things of that nature. So if you think about it, we're injecting here within a couple of weeks right at 5,000 workers into this into our healthcare workforce in Oklahoma, which they will be sorely needed and will be immediately providing not only healthcare but solutions to the pandemic that we're in. We're very proud of those numbers, and again, I think it's part of our overall effort to be responsive and contribute to the crisis that we're confronting.
So the University of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State University have announced that they're planning on having traditional residential classes or close to traditional residential classes this fall. Is that a decision that's subject to approval of the state regents? And how secure do you feel that we can educate students in classrooms safely?
Well, I think first of all, that's not a state regent decision, Wayne, but it is one that the institutions, in our role as the Constitutional Coordinating Board, we certainly have a lot of discussion, but it's ultimately a decision that's made by the governing board of the institution in conjunction with the president. To that end, I think your question as to how safe do we feel as institutional leaders and their governing boards are weighing information to make this decision. I certainly think, I know that everyone is evaluating this with the lens and with the understanding that you really, our top priority at the end of the day, our chief responsibility is to make sure that our campuses are safe and as safe as they can be. Again, not just for students, but for faculty and staff and visitors as well. And so based on the discussion we have had, University of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State University announced, as you know, last week that they were going to be opening campuses for the fall, opening the residence halls. I know those decisions and a number of other campuses have followed suit since then. And in every case, I think they're evaluating the CDC guidelines, the projections that they are looking at. They're taking the precautions in terms of the social distancing necessary and really drilling down just in terms of what protocols may be necessary before you can enter a classroom or before you can enter a residence hall in terms of not only things like social distancing, but temperature checks and things of that nature. So I think our campuses have approached this in the appropriate way and in a way that has the safety of everyone involved on the campus first and foremost. Again, I think the resolve is there. This is a crisis where we've got to continue to watch the numbers. We have to continue to watch how it evolves, but I'm comfortable that our presidents and our governing boards are exercising all of the caution and taking into account all of the measures that they need to as they've made these decisions to open the campus back up for fall 2020.
Is there competitive pressure among the institutions to get back into the classrooms?
Well, I think, again, there may be, I think after OU and OSU made their decision, candidly, I think President Goodson and others were evaluating, and some are continuing to evaluate opening up for the fall as an option. I think all of our institutions under the Regional University Board, called the Russo Board Northeastern in Broken Arrow and Tahlequah, UCO in Edmond, Northwestern, in Alva and Enid, Southwestern in Weatherford, Southeastern in Durant, East Central in Ada, Redlands Community College at the 2-year level, Rose State College at the 2-year level. A number of them have already announced publicly their plans to open, and again, many others are looking at that or are announcing here late last week or early this week. So I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, you look at to some degree while you may be looking at what others are doing as you make your decision. My experience in talking to the presidents, everybody's evaluating it. They have their criteria in place, and they're trying to make this decision based on the best interest and the health and the safety of students and others on campus. And I think that's the criteria that's guided them.
President Goodson, has TCC made any decisions about this summer or fall?
We have made decisions. They have not been announced yet. We did announce summer. We were among the first to announce that summer was going to be completely online, especially being here in an urban area of Oklahoma, just with more density. We didn't feel like that quickly we would be able to scale up practices across all 4 of our campuses to accommodate the social distancing and the CDC and Tulsa Health Department guidelines. For summer, we're approaching this with 4 different modalities. We call it flex scheduling. Rose State just came out with what they called flex scheduling also. It's similar. We will have about 40% of our coursework delivered online. We'll have, there'll be 2 middle categories. One will be called online live, where you're meeting at the same time, but you're meeting via Zoom or some other sort of video conferencing software tool. Then we'll have a group of blended courses, which will be, you'll meet in person sometimes, but the majority of the course will be online. And then we'll have some face-to-face, but only about 20% of our courses will be face-to-face, and usually about 75% of our course sections are taught face-to-face. So there's some formulas that the CDC recommends in terms of how many students can fit in a classroom. We are looking at not having any students in classrooms back-to-back so that we can go through a cleaning process between each class. We'll be using our largest classrooms and spaces first. We'll be repurposing what might be large spaces for larger gatherings or something of that sort. We'll be repurposing those for classrooms so that if you had a large class that needed to meet in person, you would meet maybe in a large auditorium and spread out, and then we would sanitize between those class meetings. So we will have what I call a continuum of opportunities for our students. We know that there are students where the online format or even the blended format is just not going to work, and we don't want to leave any students out. So we're in the process right now of retrofitting our schedule to accommodate that, and that schedule will be out in the middle of May, in the middle of this month. I expect it in probably 2 weeks from now. In the meantime, students are still registering for classes, and we'll be working with their schedules and adapting those after that schedule is out. So our advisors have a lot of great work and student interaction ahead of them in helping those students manage those opportunities. And we're pretty excited about it. We think it's actually going to be something that it'll be an adaptation for this round, but I think in the future there will be a lot of students interested in these other modalities as well.
So what you just described is the summer plan. What's your timeline for making an announcement concerning fall?
So internally, we've started that announcement slowly. We'll make a full announcement about that internally, probably early next week, and then we'll be sending out more detailed information to the public we'll probably send a general press release out sometime later next week. And then we'll need to publicize again when the actual schedule is out, because like I said, for face-to-face and blended and online live, there's going to be a specific schedule for each student. So only the pure online courses will not require students to be at a certain place at a certain time.
Okay, I've got a really specific reader question here about health sciences programs.
Yes.
How will clinical competencies be demonstrated to satisfy accrediting agencies in an online environment? Now, I'm going to ask you to explain the question a little bit
Sure.
to people who aren't health sciences people, but also
Right.
a little bit further. In general, it seems to me that some of the things that you learn in a college classroom either aren't learned as well in an online environment. How do you make sure that the quality of the degree programs are preserved and classroom rigor is maintained?
Sure. That's a great question, and it was one of our first questions as we had to move into this environment. And we have skill labs that can be delivered online. There are some practices that students can engage in without an instructor directly present. They could, but more importantly, we have simulation opportunities, so we can have students use a simulation and be socially distant in that environment and not have direct patient contact, but they may be using one of our simulation mannequins in the lab and practicing social distancing. And then our students have had clinical hours take place every single year. They are not just taking place towards the end of their curriculum or the end of their program. So they've been engaged in clinical rotations or clinical practices the whole time. Our faculty are working with students to reinforce those skills through video conferencing environment. And then we're working with our accrediting bodies to prioritize what we need to accommodate in this time frame. And knowing that many hospitals actually have a training component at the beginning of a nurse's tenure or an allied health practitioner's tenure at the beginning of their time in an employment situation. So it's kind of working both ends to the middle. We're doing everything we can in this environment. We're practicing social distancing with our simulation labs. And then we're also relying on our accrediting body and our employers to tell us what those students need before they can graduate.
So I assume TCC is not the only school going through this. So
Right. It's a national conversation.
Right. You're using the best practice standards that are being developed at a lot of places simultaneously.
Right. Right. And when you think about it too, no different than at the very beginning of this crisis, they talked about medical students who were getting ready to graduate. And they said, we're ready for them. So I think it's not only the responsibility of the schools, it's a huge responsibility on our part, but it's a partnership between the schools, the accrediting body, and the receiving employers to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks and that we maintain the highest level of rigor for all of, in order to care for all of our patients going forward. And that's not just the case for our allied health and nursing programs. That's also the case across all of our programs. We can't send anybody out in the workforce if they don't have the skills necessary to perform those duties. But I think in this environment, I think employers and schools and accrediting bodies are all partnering to make sure we get people out there ready to work, and that they have the skills they need to be able to perform at whatever level is needed for the position.
Chancellor Johnson, welcome to Oklahoma. It's not too surprising that we had a reader ask about fall athletic programs. Have any decisions been made there? when might we expect some announcements, and what sort of standards are the regents going to use to require that the colleges and universities maintain safety for athletes, staff, and fans?
Well, actually, Wayne, this is one area that's not directly under the state regent's purview, but like many others in our coordinating role, we have a lot of contact. Had conversations the latter part of last week with both University of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State University. Bottom line, no decision has been made yet. And as they continue to evaluate, the players in the mix will be the NCAA, which primarily has jurisdiction over the playoff system, things of that nature. But the big player in the mix, in the case of our two largest institutions, Oklahoma State University and the University of Oklahoma, will be the Big 12 conference, and obviously they have to coordinate there. Some of our other institutions are members of their own individual conferences, and the conference will be a key in making that decision, because if you're going to have a collegiate play, certainly it's got to be a decision where those participating members of the conference are consulted and make a decision jointly. To that end, you're exactly right. I think the first conversation that at least has allowed it to go to this step was the fact that there will be classes in the fall. If the students aren't going to be back on campus, it would be rather difficult to even consider athletic programs and whether or not they're going to be operating. So certainly social distancing, the CDC guidelines. There have been discussions. Again, none of this has been finalized. It's all just part of the ongoing discussion and review that the seasons, particularly for fall sports, may not start in August. It could be that they start later and even go into the spring, which would be, again, in Oklahoma, a little unusual if you had a scenario where you have, for major sports, both football and basketball occurring at the same time. But the short answer is none of that's been decided yet. They are watching the clock and continuing the discussions. Again, for our two research institutions, the Big 12 will be a large player in that decision-making process.
Do you think we'll end up with fans and stands for football games?
I think at this point they are frankly discussing the option with fans and what that would look like to achieve social distancing in a stadium environment, and I think they obviously are probably looking at a scenario without fans. Of course, again, you go back to the financial part of this, which is critical to everything, and game day generates a lot of revenue, particularly for, again, our two research institutions, just in terms of the boxes at the game, the concessions, and all of the, certainly television revenue, all of that goes into the bottom line. So this is it's a complex decision, but I think all of the institutions are in consultation with their conferences to try to, again, make a decision that's responsible, but one that also is one they realize that there's the clock's ticking on when they have to ultimately decide. But again, no final decisions have been made yet.
Okay. So as we wrap up, I want to give both of you an opportunity to say anything that you have on your mind that you think our readers would like to hear. Final thoughts, Chancellor Johnson?
Well, I just say that I'm really very proud. And again, I want to, President Goodson's a valued friend and a colleague. And as we address these issues from a system-wide basis, I can always count on President Goodson and TCC to be right there in front, making cutting-edge decisions that are helpful to the system. And to that end, I think we have stepped up. We transitioned on a dime, if you will, to providing the online opportunity, which allowed students to continue their learning opportunity for the spring and the summer, which is critically important. The help that we've provided in terms of not only donating equipment, but just the roles that our institutions have played to be direct responders to aid in addressing the pandemic. We at the state regents level, we've not only facilitated the meetings with the presidents, but developed a number of response documents, a response to COVID-19 document that's updated daily on our website, and also a frequently asked question document. I think central to all of this, whether it's a face-to-face class or an online class, we have kept the needs of the students. We've kept the fact that our responsibility, whatever the teaching format, to give our students a top quality higher educational opportunity, that has been front and center. And Wayne, I just think our college universities have been responsible and have certainly stepped up when we needed to step up to respond to a crisis that none of us have really seen in our lifetime. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank our presidents, our regents, and everyone in the system for doing, I think, as you said in one of your pieces, doing what we're expected to do, but I would say that we did it very well.
President Goodson, final thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Wayne, for bringing us together for this conversation. And I do want to say I've been grateful, really grateful to the Chancellor and the state regents for the guidance that they've given, not only in bringing us together every week to talk about what's giving us concerns that week, but also just with things like, how do we grade students when they don't have the all the tools they need to be at their optimal performance level? So they've made various guidance opportunities for us in a variety of areas, from grading to billing students to social distancing, all sorts of things. So I really appreciate that. And then there's a couple of collaborative groups here locally in Tulsa that I'm really grateful that we've started coming together. One is how we're going to redefine ourselves as a community through an economic development push in terms of how to reinvent our Tulsa economy. That involves the Chamber, the City of Tulsa, Workforce Tulsa, Tulsa Tech, TCC, and just bringing those groups together, bringing higher ed and businesses together to figure out how to do that. So I'm grateful we're moving forward that way. And then there's also a group together that's come together through Impact Tulsa about the digital divide issue. And it's a fairly large group of K-12, higher ed, businesses, just people coming together to try to figure out how to address this really important equity issue. So I guess my final thought with those three examples is just the leadership and the appreciation I have for people just putting their guard down and really coming together to solve problems as quickly as possible in this unusual and unprecedented environment.
I want to thank Glen Johnson, Oklahoma Chancellor for Higher Education, and Leigh Goodson, President of Tulsa Community College, for joining us today. You've helped us understand a challenging situation and let us see some of the creative solutions the state is devising to deal with the COVID-19 challenge. Thank you too to our viewers today and to our sponsor, the George Kaiser Family Foundation. Join us again next week for our next Tulsa World Let's Talk virtual town hall, featuring former Oklahoma Speaker of the House, Chris Steele, a leading advocate for state prison reform, to talk about the challenges of the pandemic to the state's incarcerated population, and Tulsa County Sheriff Vic Regalado, who will be discussing his experiences at the Tulsa jail. I'm Wayne Green, Editorial Pages Editor of the Tulsa World. Goodbye for now.